Hi, and welcome to the second part of the Great Pyramid series, Message from the Stars. I'm your host, Klein, and I've been making films now for 15 years, and to me, filmmaking is very simple. It's just 1, 2, 3. There's a setup, the complication, and the resolution. Message from the Stars is the complication segment of this series, and although it's been designed to stand alone, it's important for the viewer to experience all three films to get a good understanding of the vision. That being said, sit back, relax, and enjoy Message from the Stars. People ask me, how did you ever get interested in the pyramids of Egypt? And how did you ever stumble into this secret and mysterious knowledge which brought you to these remarkable conclusions? Boy, what a question. It hardly seems that I've circled the sun 61 times when it feels like I'm just now waking up. 61 solar cycles, or as humans say, 61 years old. Time flies, but the memories are still vivid. It was some 40 years ago. I can remember it very clearly. I was 22. A landmark time that changed the entire direction of my life. That's when it began. I was attempting to secure a position on the San Francisco 49ers when it suddenly all came to a catastrophic end with a serious knee injury. I remember the year passing slowly, but I wasn't ready to give up on my dream of playing in the NFL. I decided I'd take another shot. The night before, when I was to leave for training camp, is the very point where it all began. I was asleep at my girlfriend's mother's house when suddenly there came a remarkable dream. In the dream, there was a woman about 55 years old with striking platinum blonde hair who was looking down at me. I didn't recognize her, but she had a very concerned look on her face, and she was telling me I had been seriously injured and had been in the hospital for 10 days. Then the dream faded away, and I awoke. I left for training camp that day, and then 4 months passed by, and I awoke in a hospital with a woman in my room, and it was the same woman that I had seen in the dream 4 months previously, and I'd been in the hospital for 10 days. I had been seriously injured in a football game and had to have surgery on my shoulder. It was the end of my career. But what had I stumbled into 4 months earlier at my girlfriend's house. That whole experience redirected the course of my entire life and was the beginning of my spiritual journey. What was the meaning of this intrusion? What had overtaken me? I had no idea, but it seemed as though I had somehow tapped into another dimension, or it tapped into me. As a young man, it had not yet dawned on me that there could exist a dimension beyond the physical, material realm. But this precognitive dream, which intercepted my attention and then morphed into reality, shattered all my categories and presuppositions. I had to know more. While it has taken many years, I have come to understand that mankind has been sentenced to an island prison in the Milky Way galaxy, to a planet called Earth, where his mental capacity has been dulled into a spiritual amnesia, failing to comprehend that the human race has been judged and sentenced to a solitary confinement, locked up and shackled with restricted mental capacities and bound in powerful emotional chains. It doesn't matter whether in extravagant or humble circumstances, mankind wanders without the slightest realization that he is cut off from existent life forms in the vast reaches of the infinite universe. From my own personal prison, in a precognitive dream state, I was permitted to view another dimension. But the world sleeps on. In the land of Syriad, today called Cairo, star-traveling messengers from the far reaches of the ancient past left their voice prints written into stone monuments. Their mission? To awaken a sleeping planet. But the world sleeps on, refusing to awaken to its quiet voice. No doubt, the Great Pyramid is their oracle, set in stone, that has been speaking over the millennia. We sleep on. Thousands of years pass by in an instant. Empire upon empire, kingdom upon kingdom. On and on we sleep, dreaming that we are awake. But we only awaken to the same old mundane prison existence we cannot understand. Our mental capacity so limited, we cannot see objectively that we dwell on a lonely planet in a galaxy suspended in a colossal universe with myriads of celestial mansions. But we here below are quarantined from the abundant life above. But there's more that complicates the story. The Wardens. They control our minds and restrict our freedom. They are the custodians, the jail masters that keep us frozen in time. Who are the Wardens? From the time of Christ, in countless reliefs and paintings, there are vast records of earthly visitation by heavenly celestial vehicles. Unfortunately today, they are called UFOs. The problem is that the term UFO carries with it a sinister, malevolent, and evil tone. But up until the 19th century, the civilized world always portrayed these visitations as positive, benevolent, angelic in nature and purpose. But in the late 1800s, two significant events took place that turned the world upside down and caused a paradigm shift. In 1877, Giovanni Virginio Schiaparelli, esteemed Italian astronomer and director of the Milan Observatory, looked through his telescope and saw the planet Mars in a light never before seen. As a result, he created the first modern map of Mars, on which he showed a system of what he called canali. Although canali in Italian means channel or gully, without the implication of being an artificial feature, nevertheless, when his work was translated into English, the word canali was incorrectly rendered as canal. The word canal implies that intelligent life forms were existent on the planet Mars. Immediately, it was taken to mean that Schiaparelli had discovered evidence of intelligent life on the planet Mars. Then, in 1898, came the astounding novel written by H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds, an early science fiction novel which describes a terrible invasion of England by aliens from Mars. It was an instant hit in his day, and 40 years later had a repeat impact on October 30th, 1938, when Orson Welles' radio adaptation of the novel was performed by the Mercury Theater over radio as a Halloween special. It caused a panic throughout the United States. The recent movie War of the Worlds, adapted from the novel, has only furthered the view. These events set the impression in stone. From that point forward up to this present day, UFOs have been connected with life from other planets, but always cast in a terrifying, sinister, and evil mode. This paradigm shift from good to evil has embedded itself like a cancer into the major institutions of our modern, enlightened society, and it is these institutions that rule over the minds of men. These are the wardens. In the USA, for example, for over 60 years, classified information from the desks of numerous presidents has been hidden from the general public. Fearful of panic by the populace, only portions of sensitive information is allowed to be scrutinized, and only then by carefully selected high-ranking officials. When it comes to the warden, called the scientific community, what does not fit into their charts and tables, and what doesn't conform to empirical evidence, is not to be considered and is simply ignored. The institutions of education follow the same limited mind circuitry as the scientific community. Year after year, class after class is indoctrinated with baffling theoretical speculations that is passed off as truth. And the media, the grand master of all, channels the bias of the institutions so that the general public is shut up and closed to anything supernatural. But of all the great wardens that sit over the human race, religion is the greatest taskmaster and offender. When phenomena such as UFOs, angels, trance states, or dreams step over the lines of theological or dogmatic boundaries, they are denounced as satanic and therefore evil. There remains in the land of Egypt a remarkable witness, a witness that has stood silent for hundreds of years, marking a historic moment in time when the supernatural eclipsed the natural. Throughout the ages, sacred writings in most every culture record instances where dreams play a major role in the lives of important historic characters. But in Old Cairo, there remains the record set in motion when Joseph, the husband of Mary, was overshadowed by an angel who warned him in a dream to flee with his family to the land of the pyramids. This Christian church has stood silently for many centuries beneath the overshadowing cloud of the Islamic religion as a memorial marking a point in time when angels intervened in the affairs of men. But what are we to make of visible personal encounters?
I was in my room. My cousin was staying with us. We're both 15. all of a sudden there was this orange light that lit up in my bedroom. Our room was just all lit up like it was going in a circular type of a form just around our room, and it was lit up orange. And my cousin grabbed my arm and she says, "No, we're getting out of here right now." But me, I had to see it. I had to see it with my own eyes. I'm just that type of person that has to see things to believe it. And I got to look out the window and I says, "Oh my gosh, it's a flying saucer." The lights were just going around. They were going around this craft in circles, and there was orange, and there was green, and there was different colors just flashing out of this craft. And the sound was phenomenal. It would sound like an air jet right outside our window. We started screaming and freaking out. These things are real. You can have experiences. You can have awesome experiences that happen. And it is an experience that has changed my life.
Alluring historic paintings of celestial vehicles, compelling stories of first-hand encounters. Could it be this same supernatural magnetism that draws such great attention to the Giza Plateau?
The Great Pyramid, for example, is the most illustrated structure on the planet. More than the Parthenon, more than Stonehenge, more than the World Trade Centers. The Great Pyramid. People are just shooting the Great Pyramids. There's a system that thinks a certain way, and the problem with that is the system kind of gets a little tight. And the system kind of gets like an old boys club, and the system kind of gets like maintaining the status quo. And because of that, they're sort of resistant to new information coming in. So the archaeologists, the Egyptologists who think they know about things, but some of their prognostications, their assumptions, their theorizations that they try to make other people think are fact, some of these have a real problem to them. So we have to look sort of a bit critically, not criticizing, but critically at all things, the Orthodox archaeology of Egypt.
From the barren sands of the Great Sahara to the matchless Temple of Karnak, Egypt is the world's centerpiece of wonderment and awe. But of all the relics from its ancient antiquity, it is the pyramids and the Great Pyramid that cast their shadow and stand aloof above all. Nevertheless, ask a camel driver, tour guide, cabbie, or horse and buggy man, it doesn't matter. They all answer the same. The pyramids are the tombs of the pharaohs. This widely expressed view is like the never-ending bleating of horns in the restless traffic of Cairo. But while this tireless traditional view is never questioned, under careful scrutiny, that viewpoint melts down like a chocolate bar in the blazing Egyptian heat. It seems apparent from history that all areas of knowledge have the same problem, and that is, old entrenched theories die hard. The great astronomer Galileo is a perfect example of that phenomenon. Galileo proved that the Earth circled the sun, when all the world at that time believed the opposite, that it was the sun that circled the Earth. As a result, the church branded him as a heretic. Columbus was another brave pioneer who proved, through his discovery of the New World, that the Earth was in fact round and not flat, as was also commonly believed. In the case of the Great Pyramid, as we analyze the remaining evidence, perplexing questions arise that punch holes in the present accepted view. And, as you will come to see, the preponderance of facts and evidence simply do not point to Khufu, nor the Egyptians, as the designer of the Great Pyramid. Off in the distance, in the area known as Dashur, is the bent pyramid, which was built in the 4th dynasty. We are presently walking around the north face of the bent pyramid, where we are visiting the very burial location of the great pharaoh who built this immense structure. What we see here on the east side of the bent pyramid is a mastaba. Mastabas were burial sites, and over a period of time, they became more elaborate to allow more room to hold the pharaoh's possessions for the afterlife. Tombs for a pharaoh's servants were constructed around the king's mastaba for the same reason. The mastabas closest to the pyramid were for the pharaoh. This one most likely for Snefru, credited for building this enormous structure. His mummy was never found neither inside the pyramid nor here in the mastaba. But if the pyramids were tombs of the pharaohs, why the need for an outside tomb in the mastaba? Why the need for two tombs? It doesn't make sense. But there are other loose ends that don't add up either. Snefru not only built the strange-looking bent pyramid, he was also credited with building the very symmetrical red pyramid just to the north of here. These incredible massive structures were not built on the whim of a pharaoh. They were massive undertakings that involved considerable planning and became the national focus of the pharaoh's subordinates, involving the combined energy and resources of his entire kingdom. It is totally implausible to consider that with such great focused energy and expanse, there would be zero national pride that would drive at least someone to keep records of these remarkable achievements. But in all of Egypt, not on papyrus, wall decorations, nor in any hieroglyphics are there any records whatsoever found that depict pyramid building, the most prolific aspect of ancient Egyptian life. What could possibly be the answer for this glaring anomaly? These images may hold a possible answer and insight into the very religious ideals that the people of that day held towards pyramids and pyramid building. Notice the dress of the warrior priest. It is in the shape of a pyramid. What religious nuance prompted this fashion design statement into the clothing of the priests? It must have reflected an all-consuming focus and devotion, because the entire issue of the pyramids must have represented something much more transcendent than mere tombs of the pharaohs. The decades-long ritual of building the pyramids and the finished pyramid itself were considered sacred to the Egyptians. In that light, to be buried inside would have been an aversion to the pharaoh, and provides an answer as to why there was a burial place provided outside in the mastaba. And what is to be made of the lack of records of pyramid building? Would that have also been a sacrilege, and therefore forbidden? The pyramid was to be venerated, and the act of it a sacrament, so records on walls and buildings were never allowed. But why? Why were the pyramids held with such reverence? Even above the pharaohs. But this transcendent view that something could have come from above never comes to the forefront, and is never considered because it is buried beneath the orthodox theory that pyramid building evolved from primitive to sophisticated tombs of the pharaohs. Like the very bends in Snefru's bent pyramid, Egyptian orthodoxy warps facts to support what has unfortunately become the traditional view. In this instance, here in Dashur, Snefru, they say, not knowing what he was doing, made serious angulation mistakes in the bent pyramid construction that he then corrected in his construction of the perfectly symmetrical red pyramid.
We're looking straight up at the red pyramid, and you can see that the blocks that make up the core of the red pyramid are so much more inferior in shaping and size to that of the Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau, and yet this pyramid was built also in the 4th dynasty. You can look at these casing blocks here. You get an idea of what the surface was like with the Tura limestone that was much bigger than this. But this pyramid was covered with a surface that was smooth. And this is a phenomenal pyramid, but it's nothing compared to the grandeur of the Great Pyramid.
But we are asked to believe that the Great Pyramid was the next pyramid in the evolutionary line of succession. But there is more we have been kept from knowing. Deep inside, into the very depths of the Red Pyramid, the rocks tell us a mysterious story. Although the body of this pyramid is dated confidently to the reign of Pharaoh Senefru, the pyramid appears to be built around a room or chamber composed of a very more ancient weathered stonework. Completely enclosed within the Red Pyramid, this chamber should not have weathered more appreciably than the more recent roof above, which does not show the same weathering. Was the Red Pyramid of Dashur constructed to enclose, house, and protect a much older, highly sacred structure? Nor is it explained in their evolutionary theory of tomb building how the pharaoh Amenemhat III, who built the Black Pyramid some 800 to 1200 years later, failed to capitalize on the accumulated knowledge of his many predecessors. Today, this so-called evolved tomb of the pharaoh lies in total shambles, his body never finding repose within it. But not only were mummies never found in any of the pyramids, neither were there mummies found in any of the mastabas. They say grave robbers, but in the case of the Great Pyramid, where Khufu's mummy was never found, that would have been highly improbable. But in order to understand why, we must take a trip to the far recesses of the Upper Kingdom. Experiencing the railway system in the land of Egypt is like walking backwards into the 1940s, but it still effectively connects the northernmost populated regions of the land, like the city of Cairo, to its more agrarian and southerly regions referred to as Upper Egypt. Before the great dynastic age of the pharaohs, Egypt was a divided kingdom between a southern kingdom, or Upper Egypt, and the northern kingdom called Lower Egypt. Menes, king of Upper Egypt, overthrew the king of Lower Egypt and had a new crown made that stood for unification. Menes became the first pharaoh of Egypt and thus launched the first dynastic period. It was this same Menes that was thought to be the Scorpion King. And while there's great disagreement over just how the first pharaoh was able to amalgamate the two separate lands, it is clear that a single ruler was able to style himself king of Upper and Lower Egypt about 3100 BC. It is here at Aswan, built along the banks of the Nile, where the story is told of how huge red granite slabs, destined for the ceilings of the king's chamber and the antechamber, were excavated from nearby quarries. The Great Pyramid was built with three different types of masonry: inner core blocks made of limestone, the harder casing blocks made of Tura white limestone, and the inner portions of the Great Pyramid, the King's Chamber and the antechamber, were constructed with very hard red granite taken from the quarries here in Aswan at the southern border of Egypt. But why did the builders use hard red granite for the King's Chamber and half the antechamber? No other pyramid in all Egypt features this very curious use of red granite for its interior construction. The answer is simple. Red granite was the hardest known substance, and it was utilized for the simple reason that the story and meaning of the coffer contained within the chamber would remain safe and intact for a long and extended period of time until humankind would wake up and comprehend its meaning. But along with the mystery of the coffer, there are other unanswered questions with regard to the red granite. Numerous huge stones weighing up to 80 tons, designed as the ceiling joists for the King's Chamber, were cut out and allegedly floated down the Nile on barges from here to Cairo. The story goes on to say that the slabs were loaded onto barges and transported 500 kilometers downriver to Cairo. But the story has serious problems. There are no known records of barges that would have been large enough to carry slabs that are 32 feet long and weigh 80 tons. Nevertheless, if there were such vessels, how would they have been loaded onto the barges? Today, the Aswan Dam regulates the waters of the Nile, but back then, the river was much wider and very shallow. These small boats have no trouble, but barges loaded down with 160,000 pounds of cargo would have sunk deep into the mud of the Nile riverbed. But even before moving the colossal blocks, they had to be cut out of the ground. What tools were used? Here is a man striking the red granite with a steel hammer. He cannot, after repeated blows, even chip off the slightest piece of the hard granite rock. Using hard steel, a substance not even known to man until the modern era. The only known tools of that age are these found in the Cairo Museum, hardly capable of such an enormous chore. Then they were carted or floated downstream to Cairo, lifted to the 50th course, and carefully set in place as the ceiling joists of the King's Chamber. No one today knows for certain how it was done. The fact of the matter is, the pyramids of the Giza Plateau, with all their intricacy, symmetry, mathematic precision, and attention to detail, not only point to the stars, they are a message from the stars. And the startling evidence suggests the designer of the Great Pyramid could not have been of earthly origin. Here is a truncated view showing the Great Pyramid at about 50% completion. The hard red granite walls of the so-called King's Chamber not yet fully erected, the ceiling of the antechamber not yet set into place, and the upper portion of the Grand Gallery not yet built with the ceilings still open. All the internal chambers are exposed. This simulated rendering gives us an idea of what the Great Pyramid looked like to the builders when it reached somewhere near the 50th course of inner core blocks before the ceilings enclosed the last major chambers. The reenactment allows us to move up and over the existing level, where a bird's eye view provides a glimpse of what the builders would have seen at this stage of the development and before the pyramid was sealed shut. Below, the hard granite floor awaits the arrival of the mysterious red granite coffer. At this point, the room is totally empty. Looking up from the floor, the walls are erected with the massive hard red granite blocks brought 500 kilometers downriver from the Aswan granite quarry. The length of the King's Chamber was 34 feet 4 inches. Its width was 17 feet 2 inches, making the King's Chamber an exact 2-to-1 rectangle. And the height was 1/2 the diagonal of the rectangle. The designer was exceptionally precise and 100% intent on creating his blueprints with absolute mathematical symmetry. It was at this precise moment in the building process that the 2-ton granite coffer was lowered into place from above. The inside of the coffer so finely crafted with precise exact cuts that it seems implausible that people of that day could have made its flooring and sidewalls meet at perfect 90-degree angles. Microscopic analysis of the coffer reveals that it was made with a fixed-point drill that used hard jewel bits and a drilling force of 2 tons. The coffer was sawed out of a block of solid granite. This would have required bronze saws 8 to 9 feet long set with teeth of sapphires. Hollowing out of the interior would require tubular drills of the same material applied with a tremendous vertical force. Here is how we try to do it today. But what tools and what process did they use 5,000 years ago? Then, the 9 ceiling joists were ready to be placed nearly 20 feet above, forming the ceiling. The joists were approximately 32 feet long, 5 foot wide, and 7 feet thick, weighing 70 to 80 tons. And no one to this day knows how the massive stones were moved 150 feet up from the plateau floor below. Neither do they know why this presumed coffin was placed in a room 150 feet above ground level when all other Egyptian practices in handling the departed was to cut down into the rock below ground level for a burial vault. Another break from the traditional burial custom that cannot be explained was that it was always customary in pharaonic burials to have the king carried to his tomb in his sarcophagus during the funeral procession. But the red granite coffer was too large to make it through any of the passageways. At the northeast corner of the chamber is the entrance passage, and it clearly shows why the coffer was dropped into place from above. So this traditional funeral ritual would never have taken place, making the historical theory that the Great Pyramid was a tomb in light of funeral tradition implausible. Apart from the coffer, the room is totally empty, but boring into the north and south walls respectively, 5 feet up from the floor, are 2 openings about the size of a volleyball, commonly referred to as the ventilation shafts. But the so-called ventilation shafts is a misnomer. What was the necessity for air channels more than 200 feet long to connect the so-called burial vault with the air outside? Mummies do not need fresh air. The dead do not breathe. In fact, the air would only accelerate the decaying process of a mummy, and workmen had no need to re-enter the chamber once it was roofed in. So why the need for air? Not in all Egypt, neither in tombs nor pyramids, does there exist any of these so-called ventilation shafts that would conduit air to the royal dead. This feature is totally unique to the Great Pyramid. No, the shafts had another purpose. Both shafts pointed to specific regions in the heavens. The north shaft pointed to Alpha Draconis. There are those that conjecture that the star location pointed to by the northern shaft, Alpha Draconis, has something to do with the angel messenger wars mentioned in the 12th chapter of the book of Revelation. Perhaps the very location of the war itself. And the south shaft, pointing to the belt of Orion, could very well be the location of Enoch's destination when he was taken from off the earth. So the shafts, designed and engineered into the pyramid walls, are pointing to a message from the stars. Once again, turning to the northeast corner of the chamber is the entrance passageway. Moving northward through the passage several meters, we come to the adjoining antechamber. Looking back on the south wall, it is clear the lower portion of the south wall has been restored by the Egyptians, as though after the passageway's closure, pains were taken to dig out and remove an obstruction that formerly blocked and sealed the way back into the chamber. Above the chiseled back portion of the south wall, there are 4 deep grooves cut into the wall, along with other features of the antechamber that serve to explain an emerging story. These rare images help us reconstruct what was inside this most amazing and perhaps most detailed of all the chambers. These 4 grooves cut into the granite face of the south wall extend all the way to the ceiling. But the south wall is not made entirely of granite. In actuality, the last 8 to 10 inches of the wall is made with limestone. The reason? The builders used a softer limestone to act as a shock absorber should the enormous weight built above become unstable due to the shifting caused by potential earthquakes. In this rendering, the ceiling has not yet been put into place
because it was necessary the 3 portcullis slabs to be lowered before the ceiling closed in the chamber. Following around the chamber back to the west side, called the wainscot, which was made of red granite, 3 flanges extend outward several inches and then down to the floor. The protrusions were created to hold the 3 portcullis slabs that would be later dropped into place from above. Between the flanges at the top of the wainscot are 3 semicircular cuts about 18 inches in width. There is another flange that appears that holds the north wall in place, but it does not go all the way to the floor. If the length of the antechamber, which is 116.26052 inches, is taken as the diameter of a circle, and using the equation of diameter times the esoteric equation of pi, pi being the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter, and is always constant, it produces a circumference of 365.242 inches. The number of days in a year, the exact number of cubits in the base of the Great Pyramid, and the number of years Enoch lived on the earth. The designer carefully encrypted the universal equation of pi into the antechamber, so that later in time it would be discovered by a people who would awaken to its purpose and meaning. It was at this point in the construction process, before the ceiling of the antechamber was put into place by the next course of interior blocks, that the 3-ton portcullis slabs were lowered into place between the flanges in the wainscot. The slabs were lowered until they rested upon stanchions that held them above the passageway, after which they would be finally lowered onto the floor at a later time. The first slab would be lowered by ropes via the 4 grooves in the south wall so that it would fit flush up against the wall. Then the other 2 were lowered into place, once again resting upon the stanchions, allowing the passageway to the so-called King's Chamber to remain open. It is here where the tomb theorists claim that the portcullis slabs were finally lowered to the floor after the mummy was carried through to the coffer in the King's Chamber. It is here, in the deep recesses of the Great Pyramid, where the tomb theorists attempt to make their final stand, continuing to argue that slabs were lowered into place later after the pharaoh Khufu had died. But this viewpoint has problems because it refuses to address numerous unanswered questions. Moving out of the antechamber via the north end passageway towards the Grand Gallery, we discover that the north wall is not the north wall at all. This partition has come to be called the granite leaf, and it extends from the west wall to the east wall, only unlike the portcullis slabs, it is in 2 sections, one resting atop the other. On the opposite side, midway down the upper section, is a very curious protrusion, 5 inches across and 25 inches from the east wall. This relief on the wall that appears horseshoe shaped is called the boss, and of no small importance, considering that the entire wall of granite had to be shaved back to create the boss was a very difficult task to accomplish. The boss has beveled edges, so there was absolutely no mechanical function for use in the building process. It had a far more esoteric purpose. The boss has no mechanical function because it was the seal and signature left by the designer. Looking up the true northern wall of the antechamber, it can be seen that the entire wall is made of limestone and not granite, all the way to the ceiling. The cushioning effect of the limestone block, as previously seen on the adjacent south wall, was also an engineering feature dialed into the north wall of the antechamber as well. The architects knew what they were doing, giving careful attention to vital details, thus preparing the pyramid to endure the long haul of human time by cushioning the pyramid with shock absorbers from potential earthquakes. These ingenious and subtle, innovative design features of the Great Pyramid were never before nor again utilized in any of the more than 100 pyramids in all the land of Egypt, and it is these features that attest to the brilliance and superiority of intellect of the designer
and architect of the most enduring structure of all time. Leaving the antechamber several meters through the square-shaped passageway, we enter the enormous and glorious Grand Gallery. Turning back around and looking at the passageway door, it can be seen that the bottom portion of the door had been chiseled back, indicating that a plug filling the passageway had been dug out and removed in the same fashion as the south door's plug in the antechamber. Below our feet is the great step that looks out like a balcony over the incredible Grand Gallery. The great step rises several meters above the sloping floor of the Grand Gallery and served as a platform that received the two plugs that would later fill the passageways that sealed the antechamber. The Grand Gallery rises from an 8-foot width at its base, and its beautiful corbelled walls ascend some 28 feet to a 4-foot slot above. The overwhelming feeling when first experiencing the Grand Gallery is that it must have been for ceremonial purposes, but in actuality, the wonderfully crafted chamber had a multifaceted purpose and functionality. At this stage in the building, the ceiling was still open, and stars can be seen moving across the slot of the open ceiling. The length of the Grand Gallery was approximately 156 feet in length, its width approximately 8 feet. There are 2 ramps along each side of the walls of the Grand Gallery and notable slots about 18 inches in length and several meters apart. Between the 2 ramps about 2 meters in depth and extending the length of the Grand Gallery was the ramp, which was so constructed so as to receive 3 enormous granite plugs. Then, before the ceiling of the Grand Gallery closed over the entire chamber, a total of 5 granite plugs had been dropped down inside. 2 came to rest on the great step, which served as a platform. The other 3 plugs were lowered onto the inner portion of the ramp of the Grand Gallery. The slots on the side ramps were designed to hold back the slabs, utilizing wood-breaking beam supports that reached across the face of the granite plugs from one side to the other. The plugs then lowered, thus blocking the ascending passageway. Nearing the lower portion of the Grand Gallery at the northern end, at the location where the west ramp concludes, there is a crude, steep, twisting crawl space called the well shaft that connects the lower Grand Gallery with the lower descending passageway down near the bottomless pit. While the well shaft is a hotly debated topic, one thing about it is very clear. In no way did it conform to the beautiful symmetry, intricacy, and precision evidenced in the rest of the pyramid. It seems totally out of place and doesn't appear to be part of the original plan of the designer. Why would the designer do such a sloppy job making the well shaft, which is such an enormous contradiction to the remarkable care that was taken in the design of the rest of the pyramid? Compare it for yourself with what you're about to see. In another remarkable design feature, builders using keen foresight and uncanny intelligence engineered into the shaft of the ascending passageway stone girdles interspaced at 20-foot intervals to protect the passageway from collapse due to the enormous weight of the 3 granite plugs. Where did Khufu get the knowledge and skills to engineer this feature into the architectural design of his own tomb? Certainly not from his father Senefru, for neither of his 2 pyramids in Dashur came close to these insights and features. The mouth of the ascending passageway was recessed about 8 inches, where it looks as though the plugs fit against it snugly, but the 8 recessed inches actually formed an inside lip upon which the granite plugs came to rest. This design feature allowed the granite plugs to butt into the entrance of the passageway and which kept them from sliding through. When the passageway was finally and completely plugged, a stone cap was placed over the mouth, totally concealing the ascending passageway. It is believed that it was this stone cap that crashed and fell onto the descending passageway floor and was heard by Al-Mamun and his men when they were breaking in. Continuing upward in the descending passageway, we come to the front door of the Great Pyramid. The door's guesstimated weight was between 15 and 20 tons. It is reported that the doorway into the pyramid was uniquely hung by 2 pins and so cleverly weighted that it could be easily lifted, but only from the inside, yet totally camouflaged so that the door was virtually undetected from the outside. Everything about the Giza pyramids points towards the stars, and this is why Robert Bauval's discovery in the 1990s is the most important breakthrough in Egyptology in recent years. There are so many questions that remain unanswered and continue to intrigue our modern mind. If the Great Pyramid was just a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu, then what was the significance of the magnificent Grand Gallery? Certainly the careful attention to its design made it more than just a storehouse for granite plugs. And why then was the religion of the ancient Egyptians considered to be a star religion? And why was the ancient mythology of the Egyptians replete with gods descending from above? And at what moment, if any, was the mummy of Khufu transported into the barren coffin in the king's chamber? And if the strange and mysterious boss in the antechamber had no material functionality, what was its purpose? Beginning with the first pharaoh Menes, the Scorpion King, Egypt was a culture that was totally and completely immersed in a kind of spirituality that heretofore has been unparalleled in human history. But what were the causes in that far-off and forgotten time that caused their preoccupation with death, the afterlife, and the possibility of immortality? While the sandstorms of history have muted the voice of the ancient space-traveling mariners, the hidden facts emerging from the long slumber of human time present a far different story than what is commonly told. Studying the intricacies, complexities, and sophisticated architectural design of the Great Pyramid suggests that its beginning was from a much greater brilliance and more superior intelligence than that which existed on the earth 5,000 years ago. But will we awaken to the silent voice of the rocks crying out? Or will we lapse back into the age-old slumber? Because if we're listening, the rocks are bringing a story that's a message from the stars.